where are you in the world, mate?
Sunny Devon, in the UK.
All
So,
right.
yeah, it's kind of back to my roots, if you could call it that. That's where
Yeah.
my old man is from. Ancestors are from Scotland. If you really
Okay.
want to know the ins and outs, but
Yeah,
yeah, heart is very much in Africa. You know the score.
I
And
do.
so, kind of living a world of moving between the UK and Southern Africa, but at least I'm in a wild, remote part of the UK, which is keeping me in check. So we've got seaside just around the corner, big open
Mm.
green hills, and yeah, beautiful coastline. Love it out here.
Yeah.
Where are you, man?
I lived in London for a while, but I don't know the UK that well. Is it like northeast, southwest of London?
Yeah, it's about 3.5 hours to 4 hours southwest of London, properly in the
Okay.
sticks.
All right. Okay. Nice, man. So are you sort of based there for some of the time? Do you do marketing in the UK, or are
Yeah,
you just there on holiday or what?
yeah. So came here during COVID, and then
Okay.
sadly during that period, I confronted some pretty tough
Mm.
challenges with the passing of my lovely Jules, my wife. So
Mm.
we stayed here during that time, and when she got ill, we were sort of on holiday, and then we stayed here. But
Okay.
as I said earlier, my roots, here, I've got family here, and so ended up being based here for Desert and Delta Safaris, but looking after the UK and European market,
Yeah.
and doing special projects, still very much involved in the day-to-day kind of projects that we're working on in Botswana, and
Yeah.
obviously get back there a lot. I think I did 4 months of the year this year in Botswana, so pretty much
Okay.
half and half.
Yeah. You've been through a very tough personal journey over the last years. I've obviously been privy to that. It's been awful for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't get to choose in life, but it's certainly something I'm harnessing, which is what obviously my wife would have wanted, and it is
Yeah.
to use it for the greater good of myself and my
Yeah.
development, and also for others, and that's where
Yeah.
we're privileged to do what we do, which is as part of
Yeah.
making people's travel dreams come true. It's also
Yeah. Totally.
self-fulfilling as well. It's wonderful.
Well, it's awesome that you've got such a mindset, That's really testament to you. Well done. Couldn't have been
Yeah,
easy to
thanks,
go
man.
through what you've been through. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I'm
how
trying to
how's
figure
life
out.
in
Yeah.
KwaZulu-Natal, Jeff?
Well, I'm actually based in Cape Town at the moment. I've been here
No.
I calculated it just now, about 6 months, because you know that I'm involved in conservation and in tourism. So there's more sort of a scene in the Western Cape here for on the conservation side of things. So I decided to come and try this kind of setup, which has been pretty fruitful. Durban is an amazing place to live, but it's sort of quite dead commercially. So it's a bit better to be done this way.
Have you got a ticket
For
to
that
the
purpose.
All Blacks game?
Unfortunately not. But what a game last weekend. It was amazing. But yeah, so I'll be watching that on TV. Our new
Okay,
sports
enjoy.
minister has made sure that all Springbok games are on SABC, which
Oh,
is
awesome.
quite something. Yeah, no, it's a big move. We're all loving him at the moment. He was a bit of a gangster. He actually spent time in jail and all sorts of things. And then he headed up his own political party, and they did pretty well in this region in the last elections. And then he was appointed sports minister under the new coalition government. So he's doing amazing things. So we love him at the moment.
Great. Back in the homeland. That's awesome.
I was trying to figure out how long we've known each other. I remember going to Chobe Game Lodge when my kids were small. So we must know each other for between 10 and 15 years. Must have been when we first met.
Yeah, I think that was 2 or 3 years into my role at Chobe Game Lodge, and
Okay.
yeah, you guys had that incredible sighting of the Pels fishing owl along the
That's
Chobe River.
right. That's right. I was having an afternoon nap, And my oldest son, he was very small at the time. He came in and woke me up, and he said, "Daddy, there's a bird, there's a bird in the tree." And I was like, "I'm having a nap." And he said, "But it's a special bird." I said, "Go and find out what it is." And he came back and he said, "It's a Powell's owl." And I jumped up. I was like, "What?" And I was out. It was amazing to see it sitting right in the garden at Chobe Game Lodge. It was fantastic,
Incredible.
actually.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hadn't been seen for years prior to that, and hasn't ever been seen again in that area. So
I believe they get taken out by the by.
yeah, they get absolutely hammered, and there's just, unfortunately, there's not enough big tree cover anymore along the Chobe River. So
Yeah.
there's just not the habitat for them there in that stretch. There's still
Yeah.
sightings of them further down the river, near Impalila Island, and then of course quite good sightings of them down in the Okavango Delta. But yeah, you were truly lucky, mate.
Yeah, yeah.
That you've got a
even got
sharp
one
son
or
as well.
two. Yes, your conservation guide was there, a very nice gent, and he's the one who kind of alerted everyone and said, "Go and call your parents." And yeah, no, I even got a couple of photos of it. I remember.
Yeah,
So
no, good times.
so you say that you were a couple of years into your stint there. So what did you do before that? Like, how did you end up in Botswana? I know that we grew up not far from each other, although we didn't know each other back in those days. We even knew some of the same people growing up, but we had never met. And then, so how did you get to Botswana? How did you end up with Desert and Delta?
So the school I went to, Treverton, which is in Moy River in KwaZulu-Natal,
Yeah.
is kind of specialized in outdoor pursuits, outdoor adventure. And there were a whole bunch of kids from Botswana, town specifically, but also in Gaborone and other areas that were at that school during that era. So yeah, kids above me, below me, geez, so many. Even the famous wildlife filmmaker, Brad Besterling, that's producing a lot of stuff that's coming out at the moment, went to that school. So
Okay.
and at one point in our department at Desert and Delta Safaris, there were three of us, myself, Stuart, who does our podcast with us, and Anita. We were in the same class, and we were all in the marketing department in Desert and Delta Safaris. But we all took different journeys and ended up in Botswana. So I think that was the initial sort of inspiration for me. It was always a place I went to go and visit when I'd go back. I went to university in the UK, and I'd go back to visit my mum in South Africa, and we'd go on a couple of adventures up to Botswana. And then my mate Stuart, he was working in one of the camps, and when I would contact him and send messages, this was pre-WhatsApp and stuff, so we'd have the odd video Skype call and things, and I'd hear the Franklins in the background and hear about his day bumbling around in the Okavango. I was like, I think might be missing something. At that point, I was in Germany, like you.
Okay.
Down in Bavaria, and I was working in the Australian travel industry, but every year went back to Southern Africa, and every year just longed more and more to be more involved in Southern Africa. And for me, the best way would be to go straight into Botswana, into the wilderness, and get entrenched there. So I started looking for jobs, and found a role and a position with Desert and Delta Safaris, which was up at Chobe Game Lodge, to be based there and sort of work with the operations team and the management, but also closely alongside the marketing and reservations team, so that we could allow that lodge to sort of kind of go through a new evolution. It was a sort of rebirth of Chobe Game Lodge, which was a bit stuck in the old ways, and it's a different kind of property. So they were really invested in it. They rebuilt the rooms. We introduced electric game drive vehicles and solar boats, and so there was so much amazing stuff going on there that it was very useful to have someone on the ground. So yeah, lucky for me. I mean, I was supposed to be there for a couple of years, but 7 years later, living at the lodge, I just had the time of my life, so lucky.
Life is what happens when you're making other plans, eh?
Don't you know it?
Amazing, hey? Amazing how sort of looking back, you can see how the dots all joined.
Yeah.
And in what point was, I'd like to get back to Chobe Game Lodge itself, because it's one of my favorite lodges, actually. But so how old was Desert and Delta at that point?
So there's sort of two rivers, if you like, that converge to make Desert and Delta safaris. If you look at Chobe Game Lodge itself, it was the first 5-star lodge of its kind in Botswana. It was actually built in 1973. So can you believe it? Last year we celebrated 50 years of Chobe Game Lodge, and it was, when it started, it was unlike anything else in Botswana. It was the place where Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton got married for the second time. They had their wedding there, and it was visited by lots of royal people from around the world. But very shortly after that, it closed because there was the Rhodesian War of Independence going on, and there were occupying troops. And the Caprivi Strip was just over the river. Sadly, they had to close in 1975, and it reopened in 83. So during that closure period, Desert and Delta Safaris was just getting going with Camp Okavango and Camp Moremi. A totally different setup run by an American woman. Yeah, so the guys that started Chobe Game Lodge pulled in some investors, and then a few years later identified Desert and Delta Safaris as the perfect match where you could combine the iconic Okavango Delta with the incredible iconic Chobe River. So that was the start of that sort of luxury safari circuit, if you like, in the early 80s. It just evolved from there with acquiring strategic camps in the perfect location to sort of draw together that amazing circuit, which is, as you know, traveling to Botswana is not really like, it's not really about going to one place. It's about combining the different ecosystems around so that you can get these vastly different experiences from one place to the next to make a truly unique safari, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's very forward thinking of them at the time. I'm thinking, I mean, it's less than 10 years after Botswana became independent. It wasn't the independence from when it was a British protectorate, was in the mid 1960s. So the market must have really been like embryonic at that point when they started to sort of develop the lodge and then team up and make it into what it is. And what a journey it must have had in the last 50 years. I mean, the world has changed a lot in the last half a century,
Completely.
So how do you think it's sort of grown in that time? I know that that's a very large question, but how do you keep on keeping it new and relevant?
It's a very good question. I've been very lucky because during the time I've been with Desert and Delta Safaris, I've had the privilege of working alongside our CEO and our directors at the time, who had been with the company since the very early stages. So, for example, Jonathan Gibson, who's our group CEO at the time, lived at Chobe Game Lodge. And so, fortunate to have lots of conversations about, the early days and things. And then at the same time, I was able to work alongside the new generation, if you like, of local citizens who were around in those early days and had now moved and transitioned into senior roles. So it's really, really interesting. Some crazy stories about the early days. But you're right, the only people that were really visiting from an international point of view in the 70s and early 80s was really, rich hunters, if you like, coming for big game hunting. And luxury photographic tourism was, as you say, completely in its infancy. So it was quite an interesting start and an interesting point. Wilderness safaris started in the early 80s as well, following that same sort of journey. And those days, like, it was, I mean, it still is to this day a vast wilderness, but in those days, so off the beaten track and unheard of. This incredible Okavango Delta and the Chobe River and the convergence of the Zambezi, all these incredible places. But there wasn't, as you said, an industry to call upon to create this luxury high-end tourism. So you think about the very basics of a professional safari guide. Well, you didn't really have that. You had, you know, the hardcore local trackers, but you didn't have professional luxury safari guides. So the very, very first safari guides were sort of expats, along with the management, along with the chefs. But what I loved about the stories I heard from the directors that we had is that they knew that as much as they had these beautiful resources in the wildlife and the natural heritage that is Botswana, the most important resource and the most important asset to look after, if you like, were the people. And that philosophy has maintained its way right throughout the company to this very day. And so if you talk about the first few years where I was visiting Desert and Delta and was about to join the company, most of the camps were run still by local citizens, but there was this wave of senior management that were effectively in this transition process of becoming full-time management. And we had a localization program at the time, and it was the vision that the whole company would be run by local Botswana citizens. And yeah, not long after you and I met is when the last of the camps became fully citizen run and operated, and it's quite an incredible journey, as you say, from those early days of pioneering luxury tourism with very little in the way of resources. I mean, going back to what you originally said, Botswana was, before they discovered diamonds in the late 60s, was one of the poorest countries in the world. Like, it was said that there was, you know, something like 12 British pounds in the government coffers in the early mid 60s, and very poor infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you think about where Botswana now is, you know, with one of the world's leading sustainable tourism industries, incredibly well educated and brilliant people, and a flourishing economy.
I know that Botswana, its tourism industry was kind of set up in a way right from the beginning, where they said, we want minimum impact on the land, but from tourism. So we're going to start off with a high-end offering. So more quality over quantity. Pretty much the way that Tanzania also did it. And I suppose that's why it's still seen as a very exclusive, expensive market. But it seems to have served you well as a business and other tourism products and the country. I mean, I remember hearing a statistic, you can challenge me on it if you like, that more people attend the Oktoberfest in Germany every year than live in Namibia and Botswana combined.
It always goes back to beer drinking when it comes to the Germans. I like it.
Don't quote me on that, but it's worth a look.
I'm sure. I mean, there's only 2.6 million people in Botswana at the moment, most of whom live in the south part of the country, the southern areas of Gaborone and the southeast areas. So yeah, completely. I think people don't realize the vastness of the country, both Namibia and Botswana. You know, in terms of Botswana is roughly the size of France, with that tiny population. It's incredible. And I think that's, you know, high end is probably, you know, a word in tourism that is probably also evolving, I would say, you know, in terms of how do you define a high-end tourism experience? And I think we mustn't lose sight of the fact that whilst Botswana has become known as this high-end destination, which is, you know, very much refined luxury safari experience, that word high-end can also, you know, mean just an experience point of view, and not being amongst crowds on safari, or being in a place where you really truly connecting with the environment and the people. So I think Botswana is always going to come at a slightly more higher price point for effectively what you could get for these examples, I'm sure, in safaris in Tanzania and South Africa. But the point is that it's a much more exclusive experience, much quieter, much more wild, if you like, from that point of view.
I know, from a tour operator side, we often get asked, well, we'd like to go to Africa. Where should we go? And my first question is always, have you been to Africa before? If the answer is no, I'm a bit reluctant to put them into Botswana. I always start them off in South Africa. We call it Africa Light. It's very sort of westernized in its infrastructure. To travel around here, you can drive on your own, etc., etc. But certainly for a second-time visitor, depending on other places in the world where they've gone to, like if they've traveled to South America, I think they're ready to go to Botswana. When in fact it's probably easier to travel to Botswana because a lot of it is fly-in. So you're just landing in Maun and you're getting picked up and you're getting flown between the lodges, and all your, unless you're really adventurous and you want to do a self-drive there, but a lot of the parks don't even allow self-drive vehicles, do they?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very sensible way to go about it, Jeff. It's a tough, I think we as operators, actually, to be honest with you, when we do what we do, we sometimes get a little bit lost in the detail about what we offer and how we offer it, because we're looking too closely at what's happening in Botswana and around Botswana. But as you point out, we are so entrenched in this destination and our offering that we lose sight of the fact that the travelers it's still an unknown destination for so many people out there. As you say, they come to you saying they want to go to Africa. It's like, well, where do we start? And
yeah.
So I think you've it's an enviable role that you've got in bringing people's dreams to reality, but also it's a challenge, and I think that's why it's so useful having traveled to all of these places extensively like you have, because it allows you to sort of put your mind into that particular traveler and what they're sort of envisage experiencing, and then talk them through it, because it might just be that Botswana is the place for them first up, because they've been to various places in the world, or as you say, maybe they just need to go to experience somewhere like Kruger or somewhere else first up, and get that wildlife hit, get those sightings done, and then maybe their next calling would be somewhere a bit more wilder like Botswana.
Yeah. Moving on to another point, like every destination has its uniqueness. I don't want to say USPs because it sounds horrible, but so how do you maintain that very unique, authentic experience? Of what is that for you? What is it for you personally? And how do you try to keep that front of mind in your sort of experience that you put together for clients?
Well, it's a good question. You've got to take a step back sometimes to really look at the bigger picture of what we are delivering. And I think by virtue of the fact that we are in these incredibly big, open, wild spaces, that the offering is in itself already unique. You know what I mean? We're so lucky that when you combine places like Chobe with somewhere like Jamluti, which is so dry, so desolate, then you go into that water wilderness on an island in the middle of the Okavango. I mean, where do you get that? And I think going back to Tanzania and Kenya, for example, and East Africa is so varied in terms of ecologically varied, geologically. You've got Zanzibar's reef and islands and tropical islands, and then you've got the snow-capped mountains of the Kilimanjaro and all the Ruwenzori Mountains and rainforests. I mean, the list goes on, right? But experientially, people come away from Botswana totally blown away. And I think you can't touch that experience that you get out there. And I think it is because so many of these areas are void of human inhabitation. And we can get onto that later, if you like, if we can talk, we can talk about that, the sort of people side of what we offer as a tourism industry. But I think it is that, it really captures your imagination that you're out there and you are in these incredibly wild spaces where you can go for days and days without seeing, villages and towns and things like that. So that's so unique. And I think then if you can blend in sort of unique experiences as well as you go along, and I think probably 20 years ago, we were very comfortable with the fact that people were coming and they would just have these experiences because combining these areas were amazing. But actually, you can add another layer on that. And then that's where the sort of surprise experiences come into their own, like stopping off on an exposed sandbank in the Delta, which I'm sure you've done, where you can dip your feet in safely and have a gin and tonic while you watch the sun go down and wattle cranes on a floodplain in front of you, or maybe going for a sleep out on an open elevated deck under the stars. These are things that didn't really exist in those early days, and you might wonder why not. But I think it's because adding this extra layer of unique experiences just makes the whole experience more gripping. And also, travelers are much more traveled, if you like, and they've done incredible things. There's so many wonderful things that you can do around the world. I mean, now you can even go and stay in Antarctica, and there's things all over the world that people can go and experience. But so I think there is a demand now to be able to go and do something over and above a standard safari, which is ultimately getting yourself out of your comfort zone even further. Coming to Africa is already, your senses are already heightened because you're in the wilderness and there's animals and things that can kill you out there, but it's all in a very safe environment. But you still feel that element of vulnerability, and if you can do something like a sleep out deck or dipping your feet into the Delta, all in a controlled, safe manner, then it just adds a whole different level.
It's quite an interesting point. It reminds me of sort of the motor industry, where cars didn't have seatbelts, and then one would come out with a seatbelt, and it was a delighter. It was a reason why people would buy that car over that car. And then they all have seatbelts, and then the next one came out with electric windows, and then they all had electric windows. And it's not always one company or one brand that comes up with a new idea, but the moment it starts selling, then everyone starts to try and offer that. And I think it's a positive thing, and I wonder actually where it's going to go. As you know, I developed a tourism product in the last couple of years, and we spent a lot of time trying to reimagine what a safari can be. Like, we actually had a campaign in-house called Safari Reimagined. Like, how do we take that traditional offering, and I'm talking about on the South African market, of getting up in the morning, going on the game drive, coming back, having breakfast, it's like, it's nice, but it's been overdone. How do you take that and you make it more exciting, but still keep it authentic without cheapening the experience? That was very, very difficult. Although there we were starting from scratch, so we couldn't really incrementally. I always think that sort of evolution's better than revolution. But when you're starting out, you want to start out on a basis, and we didn't really have that. But what do you see as sort of the forefront in terms of the experience, or rather, the tourism industry always goes through these buzzwords, right? Experiential travel, transformational travel. What is the buzzword now, and where are you orientating?
Well, I think you nailed two straight away there. Transformational is one that's popping up a lot over the last 2 years.
What
Experiential.
does that mean exactly?
Well, I think that's a good one. Everybody here in the UK is meditating and microdosing on mushrooms, Jeff. I don't know if it's reached South Africa yet, but
I believe people do that.
So it's all people are looking for deeper connections when they travel. I think that's what it comes down to. deeper connections with the places they visit, but also deeper connections with themselves. So they're actually, and these are things that have probably been happening. In fact, I know they've been happening for many years, any case. But now there is as you said earlier, a buzzword around it, and that's that, and that's a trip to Africa is always life changing, I think, and I'd be confident. I'm sure you are confident in saying that for pretty much anybody, first timer or 10th visit, for anyone who lives outside of the country, the countries that we operate in, and the whole continent. So that's what I think now is people are focusing on a lot more, is that life-changing experience that people have always had when they come to Africa. And what's creating those life-changing experiences? Well, a lot of the time, it's actually the connection that you make with the people of Africa and understanding what it's like living in some of these very remote wilderness areas. And Africa's got it's a continent that don't need to tell you or your listeners what a past it's had in terms of a continent and the countries that we operate in. But there is a tremendous sense of contentment amongst a lot of African people, and I think that is very humbling for our visitors. I think I'm just scratching the surface here about what comes to light when people visit Botswana and other countries, but that's one element of it. I think also, having lived in Germany and the UK and other parts of Europe as well, I've learned that people are quite cold. I don't mean to be rude, but in Botswana, it didn't take me long to realize that it's important to go through a thorough greeting ceremony, if you like. It sounds a bit crazy, but when you're wandering through the lodge in the morning, our immediate habit would be to put your head down and go where you've got to go. But it's important that you greet everybody that you pass, and that's walking. If you're stopping, then, you need to say, hello, how are you? I'm fine. Cool. Yeah, everything's all right. Yeah, all good. Okay, fine. Now we can start talking.
Yes.
When I order my coffee around the corner here, the guys are offended if I ask them how they are, because they just don't have time. They don't have time. And this is just a little anecdote of an example of what it's like. But it really does truly make a difference when people have done a long trip and they realize that people genuinely care. And, there's a genuine feeling of warmth and hospitality amongst what we do. And you might not get the most polished service that you could get around the world, but I can guarantee you it's going to be the most genuine, friendly service that you could get around the world. And that's what people love about it. And now I think the next step that we need to take is bringing that awareness to light, and maybe sort of going a little bit against our logic, in the sense that people are coming to Botswana to, as I said, to be in the wilderness and to disappear from civilization. But in actual fact, I think it's important for people to learn a little bit more, because the only guests, the only people that they might get to know on a trip to Botswana would be the people at the lodge. And that's something that time and time again, our visitors say, man, the people in Botswana are wonderful. The staff are wonderful. What an incredible connection we've made. Let's take that a step further now and start to visit more communities and people that are living in the outskirts of these wild areas. So I think transformation in terms of people's experiences is something that we've got to thrive on, or we've got to really bring that to people's attention on why come to us, and then also start to make people aware of tourism can make a difference. And maybe that's part of another chat that we need to have, but that's important.
That is a major point, and I want to get back there. But it's interesting that you were talking about people in the UK that are trying to find themselves, and they're doing meditation and they're eating mushrooms and all these things. It's very similar to something that is ancient in Botswana, in that the Khoisan are masters at that. but no one really understands their techniques. Like our Western culture is very influenced by, say, Asian culture, like yoga and mindfulness and Confucius and, all of these people. Whereas you've got, I mean, you know more about this than I do, but I remember a word called mu, where the Khoisan, they would dance themselves into a trance until their spirit would leave the top of their head. And that's the mu that is leaving them. I mean, that is amazing. Like, I'm not saying like it would be quite contrast to have people doing that with them, but there's a lot of learning that I feel is not being imparted. And as you said, like most people will meet the people who work in the lodges, which is lovely. Like I've stayed in your lodges, and people are amazing, and even that in itself is enough. But those people are trained in hospitality, and their jobs are to be nice to guests and to smile and to be happy, and they're not really getting in touch with local people. I remember you took me to a place called Kumaga, near to Larula Tower, on a Sunday, and we had a very brief interaction there with some of the locals that had way too much to drink, and they were drinking shake. And that was, I mean, I remember that, and I think we must have been there for 45 minutes, but it's a part of the journey that wasn't necessarily planned, that gave me a unique insight, which out of all the amazing things that we experienced on that trip, that one remains in my memory. So
Did you
yeah,
taste the shake? Can't remember.
I did taste the shake. I didn't
Maybe
get the
I
shake
can't remember
shakes.
because I tasted it as well.
I remember it's pretty foul, that stuff. What do they put in there?
Yeah, it's sorghum, and it's quite fermented. It's
Okay.
not, it's
Yeah,
not
not
everyone's cup
tasty.
of tea. Yeah, it's lovely, mate. I mean, you've touched on
Yeah.
various things there. I think integrating the ancient Kalahari or the Khoisan Bushman experience into our guests' experiences in Botswana is something we should be doing more. And luckily, so we took on a new camp in during COVID, which is actually sort of stepping out of the realm of wildlife tourism, if you like. I mean, it is still a wilderness area. It's in a pristine part of the Okavango panhandle, so there's a prolific amount of birds and hippos and crocodiles and things like that. But it's not a place that we're actually sending guests to go and experience like the Big Five or game drives. It's actually a place where we want people to enjoy the Okavango, but also connect with the ancient and both the ancient and the modern culture of Botswana. Yeah, so we're starting a new camp, a sleep out camp in a place called Todilo Hills. And when I went to visit this property, by the way, there was a little bit of ambivalence from our directors about whether we should get this camp and bring it into our portfolio, because it was a bit apprehensive about the lack of the safari element and whether it would fit in. But the moment I went to this place called Todilo Hills, which is basically the spiritual home or it's a spiritual monument for the Khoisan for thousands of years, I was completely captivated by it. And I said to myself at the time and to everybody else there, I said, like, as long as Todilo forms a major part of what we offer at Namasiri Island Lodge, then I think it's a no-brainer that we bring this on board. And the current owners were sort of, we take guests there for day trips, but it's a bit far and, this and that. And I was like, well, this is our first challenge, is we need to put this place on the map. And because it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I think it's, by my latest stats that I saw in the early days, I think there's just over 1,000 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And I think this is the 900th least visited UNESCO World Heritage Site in the world, which is a strange statistic to throw out there when you're trying to encourage people to go and visit it. But it's because it's a lost monument that is forgotten, because people come to Botswana for wildlife safaris, and if Todilo Hills was somewhere else in Africa or the world, because of this rich abundance of rock paintings that are there and the history of this place, it would be world famous, and I'm convinced of that. And so
That's
we're going to
amazing,
be
yeah.
taking guests there for a sleep out in a very, very basic little hut, if you like. We've created these Bushman pods, which will be launching at the end of this month, end of September 2024, and it'll allow guests to go there, sleep in amongst these hills, and to spend time with the Khoisan Bushmen to talk about and sort of bring to life what this place means. And a lot of that is about that trance dance that people would get into, and that's how the rock paintings ended up on the walls, on the rocks of the hills, is that the shamans would get into that trance and experience that vision that would come out as a result of this continued monotonous singing and dancing around the fire. And those paintings were the visions from what they saw, and it was a combination of spirit and what the challenges were day to day. I mean, there's paintings on the rocks there depicting penguins and whales. Then you got to ask yourself the question, like, how, could it have been a vision, or was it a sort of spirit animals that were seen by the tribes that were living in the coastal areas, passed on from nomadic tribe to nomadic tribe? So much of what exists there, we don't know the answer to this day. And I think for guests to have the opportunity to sit around a fire, talking with some of the elders whose ancestors are from this area and have been visiting Tsodilo Hills for thousands of years, I think will be a very humbling experience. Whether you do or you don't take your mushrooms there or on your way there, I think it's a profound experience in that environment, and we're very excited about it. So watch the space on that.
I mean, honestly, I think my hairs have stood up on my arms. It just, you telling me this, it sounds, I'm excited. That's an amazing product to have, and an experience to offer. I've never been to Tsodilo Hills. I've been to Matopos in Zim. Have you been to Matopos?
I have not. No, I've heard a lot about it. Looks amazing.
How the two compare. Well, Flip, that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what those pods look like and how people are going to sleep out and things like that. That sounds,
as you say,
really awesome. Yeah,
it's going to be a little bit of a step out of your comfort zone as well, being out there in that environment, but very special. And I think another thing that guests will be able to do out there is actually get a little bit of adventure activity experience. So you can hike to the top of the mountain, which is, for most people, especially you there in the Cape with your big mountains there, it's not that's not a massive mountain. It's only 400 meters from the base of the hill to the highest point, just over 400 meters. But it's still the highest peak in Botswana, so that's quite cool.
That's half of Botswana.
Yeah. So you can get a bit of a stride on, get some exercise, because it's like in Botswana, you're going from vehicle to boat, and doing very short walks. It's nice to get exercise, and it all adds to that experience. When you exert some energy, it also sort of heightens your emotional experience of a place. And so I think it's truly an exciting place, and I think it's happening at a time when travelers are calling out for these type of experiences wherever they go in the world.
Yeah, I think you're hitting it right at the right time, as you say. And the last thing we need is another 5-star lodge somewhere. I mean, 5-star lodges are amazing, but I think these experiences, as you said in the beginning when we were talking about the price point and things like that, these experiences is really where the luxury is. The luxury of being there at the 935th least visited UNESCO site. That in itself is a selling point for me anyway. That's really, really exciting. Nice one, James.
Sure.
I'm glad you were able to convince them, managers and the owners of the company, that was a good idea. So, I mean, have you guys ever sort of looked at going beyond the borders of Botswana, or are you sort of staying true to Botswana, or sort of where do you see the journey going?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think as a group, so it's worth mentioning that Desert and Delta Safaris sits as part of a group of tourism products. So we have Desert and Delta Safaris and Chobe Game Lodge. We've also got another circuit of camps and lodges called Kurandani Botswana. So you're probably familiar, as you know, with them. And also, as you know, as a brand, Kurandani is one of the pioneers of safari in Africa. So it's not got a relationship with any other Kurandani outside in the world, but it's a name that we adopted when we started operating there. We also have our own charter flight company. So Safari Air is owned by Chobe Holdings, which is our umbrella company, and we were the first safari company to actually list on the Botswana Stock Exchange. So to answer your question, we still are the only safari operator listed on the Botswana Stock Exchange. And I think that's very much been our commitment, is very much invested. And every dollar that is spent on a safari with our company, with our group, remains in that country, because our bank accounts are in Botswana. Our taxes are paid in Botswana. You know, there's quite a lot of operators out there who might be operating in Botswana, but you end up paying a bank account in Mauritius. So I understand there's efficiencies there, and I get that. But when it comes to an operation, I'm very proud of the fact that Chobe Holdings, Desert and Delta are so fully committed to this country, and also to play our role, you know, in ensuring that the development of the industry, that the government is aware of what's going on in the private sector, and building our relationships, and also to demonstrate that where we started this conversation, Jeff, which was around our success story in taking tourism from its infancy to now, where our managing director, MC Odemeti, you know, he started as a barman and a guide at the company in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now he's the managing director of the group. All of our camps are general managers, you know, so they you know, there's a lot that our government needs to be aware of. And so we've got that sort of responsibility on our shoulders, making sure that we're doing things better than should be, in terms of female empowerment, in terms of responsible tourism initiatives like solar panels on our boats and things like that. And so I'm getting to your question, are we going to go beyond the borders? Well, I think we are. And the reason is because we've very much sort of kept our heads on our shoulders and focused on doing what we do in the country. You know, all of our camps and lodges are fully 100% owned by us. We don't do sort of management contracts and things like that. But I think now our name is becoming quite synonymous with providing exceptional experiences in the safari realm in Botswana. And so now I think there's a calling for us to move beyond the borders. So watch the space. Zambia is looking particularly interesting, because I feel it's another destination which has got incredibly vast wilderness areas, and is in need, I think, perhaps of some bit more structure and circuits, and that's something that we as a group could bring in there, in terms of providing access and providing a name and a brand, and so hopefully in the not too distant future, you're going to hear a little bit more about how we spread, and a lot of that is to do with us talking a bit about our brand and our success. You know, sometimes you've got to be proud of what you've achieved and sing from the hilltops about it. You know, one likes to be modest, but also it's important to have this discussion with people. So thanks for the opportunity, you know, to appear on these sort of chats and these platforms, so that more people are aware of what we've done and what we can do.
I think it's important for people to know more than just sort of your product offering. You know, in the pretty pictures and the nice videos that people see online. You know, since I've been in this industry, it's always been important for me that we offer product to our clients that are vested in exactly the way that you have described. But it's it doesn't seem to always be important to everybody. And I wonder how important it is to the tourist, to the consumer at the end, that the product is ethically sourced. Like if you think about other industries, there would be a sticker that you can go and see, well, this is biodegradable or this is recycled plastic and therefore you should buy this. Although it might be a little bit more expensive than the other ones, you're doing the right thing. There's a thing in Germany called the grüne Punkt, which is the green point. And you can see it on all sorts of products. And I've always wondered, why isn't there such a thing for tourism? You know, like it can be such an exploitative industry if we let it get away. And there are so many large multinationals that don't operate in an ethically sound way. So, yeah, I think it's important. And thank you for bringing that part out, because that's very much about why I wanted to start sort of doing this podcast, was to bring out this background information that is sometimes overlooked and not brought to the forward as a decision-making criteria for clients. You know, you don't want to go on holiday knowing that you are not making a positive impact. You at least don't want to make a negative impact, and you need to really understand what the one is and what the other one is.
Yeah, and that's the point. Your role is not to be flippant about it, but actually for you to tell the travelers, you know. And I think your type of traveler, you're not rolling out numbers for your business model. It's about identifying the right people that you want to send on safari, and tell them that that tourism has a tourism opportunity already, as it what it's achieved and what it can do in the future in terms of preserving these wild places, and in critically getting people involved, local people in that process, in the buy-in and involvement, because that is crucial. Without the local inhabitants understanding and being a part of tourism, it's going to fail. So it's both the wild spaces and the people, and tourism can bring the two together in harmony, and both local communities and wilderness can flourish if it's done properly. And by identifying the right operators around Africa that are operating in this area, then your guests, your travelers, actively helping by coming on a trip.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this is why we are partners.
Nice.
James, when do we see each other again? Are you doing any big shows, any travel shows in the next couple of months?
Yeah, I will be around. I go back to Botswana at the end of October, which is just before the rain starts. So it's a very hot time of year, as I'm sure you know. But it's a wonderful time of year where it's teetering at the edge of breaking into a new season, which I love so much. Yeah. And I'll be there right until through to December.
Okay.
And we got local travel shows there happening in Botswana, and a lot of visitors from different travel companies will be coming at the end of November, early December. And then I'll be staying in South Africa over Christmas, New Year. I might make a little trip down to Cape Town and hopefully see you there. Otherwise, it'll be around May time at the usual shows. But I'm sure we'll all those ones. Yeah, but really enjoying following your journey, Jeff. Well done on setting this all up. You know, if people who will end up traveling with you and have already will be in safe hands, and I know that it's a lot of work pulling it all together, but it's tremendously satisfying, isn't it?
I love it. I mean, as you know, I've been out of it for a couple of years, but being back in again is like putting your hand in a glove. You know, it just fits, feels nice. And you know what? I've always been really excited about the people in the industry. That's really, you know, people like yourself, who've just got such interesting stories to tell and have got their heart in the right place. That's always been something that stood out, and especially about Botswana. You guys have got such an amazing community there, that are sort of always, you guys are competitors, but you're cooperating. So the co-opetition amongst yourselves is like the best in Africa. I've never experienced that anywhere else, and in any other industry. It's quite remarkable. And Well, James, I don't want to take any more of your time, mate. It's been awesome catching up with you. It's nice to see how your hair is growing. Keep on like that.
Good stuff, guys.
Awesome.